guys, I'm Stella. I'm going to take you through the moon salutations with a focus on hip and knee biomechanics. So finding the best position that suits you and getting the most depth out of your hips and also the most engagement around the hip and knee joint area to create really resilient joints. And this is purely a focus on the physical aspect of this area and this area in the moon salutations. So getting started in Tadasana. First off, what I want you to get a feel for is the folding at the hips into a squat-like position. Take the heels of your hands into the knife edges of your hip crease. If you do a little butt sticking out, you'll see that hip crease get a little bit deeper. So the knife edges of the hands are going to go there. And like you would in Utkatasana, just coming into a chair position. And feel like the hip crease is kind of pulling the knife edge of your hands deep in there, and you can feel that fold occurring and rise up. So my first cue was just deepen the front hip crease, working into that squat-like motion and coming up. So you're just watching here that when people do come in to any kind of chair, squat, malasana, goddess, that they're not just leading with the knees and getting that tucking of the tail. You really want to form nice movement backwards of the thighs, and I'm going to say butt cheeks widen to allow greater depth. Great, a couple more. This is just obviously in Utkatasana. And just having a look down and seeing what the knees do as well. They may or may not slide slightly forward over the ankles, that's fine. I say as a general rule of thumb, you want to be able to see your toes, unless you're going for a really, really deep squat, in which case it's actually okay to progress so that the knees can go further, depending on what you're doing. For our moon salutations, however, with our goddess, our malasana, skandasana, we'll take the knee over the ankle a little bit. So you do want to feel if you have any restrictions, any limitations, any stiffness in the ankle joint, or any stiffness in the calves. That is going to limit you from going a little bit further. You can see I'm a little tight in my calves, also lack a little bit more mobility in dorsiflexion, so it's a little bit harder without my heels coming off to get that position. So what we're looking for, team, is a nice easy fold at the hips and the knees at the same time. Down and up. Great way to prep. I'm going to come sideways. I'm going to ask you now to come out of Tadasana and just go into a malasana position. Same thing, place the heels of the hands into the knife edges of the lycra, and then think deep fold and up. Deep fold and up. Once you've had that feeling of folding at the hip, increasing that hip crease, yeah, then check out the knee alignment. Rule of thumb, general rule of thumb, track the knees and the shins over the second and third toe. The deeper you go, of course, the more the bottom will slightly go back and down, and there'll be a deeper hip crease. So just warming up through the hips before we start our moon salutations. And we'll review the knee alignment, the hip position. First of all though, have your hands here, and what I want you to do is just go into a posterior tilt, which means the tail tucks under the pelvis, the two bones do this, and then an anterior tilt. You'll feel your tail reaching to the back of the head, you'll feel your bottom cheeks widening, and a posterior tilt and an anterior tilt. Place the knife edges of the hands in the hip crease and feel the difference. When you go into that posterior tilt, they kind of stretch. The hip joints push forward. When you go backwards, the hip joints, the thigh bones slide a little bit deeper. And that's kind of what we want to aim for in all our squatting, deep lunging positions. Take more load into the hips so the hips can work and the musculature around the hips. Less so just all into the knee joint then. Driving on up and coming back. Great. One more thing before we start. Just getting a nice bit of hip mobility. Coming into the standing hip circles, working on your balance, standing on to this leg. Take this leg up, turn it outwards, and raise it up as high as you can. Think about a half pigeon on the floor, your hip stretch. This is essentially your standing position. Take it up as high as you can, hold it there, take it out to the side. Turning it into internal rotation, seeing how much space and easeful access you have of that movement. Push it backwards, lower it down. We reverse, guys. Push it to the wall behind you, Turn the kneecap out and really reach as far out to the side, reaching the shin, pushing the ankle, returning back to center. Let's do 2 more. I'm going to hold my waistline to try and keep my waistline and my hips, my hip bones as still as possible. This is a nice way to start, especially if you see anyone a little bit sticky in the hips, or maybe that you do for your first moon salutation. Feels a little sticky in the hips, so you might come back to this before you go for your second round. Other side. Taking it up into that standing half pigeon position, as far as you can go, feeling that stretch, and then taking it to the side. Internal rotation, pushing it back, lowering down, reversing back, side, reaching to the side and back, and up. Handy to have hands on the waistline. You could also be holding onto a wall, you could also be holding onto a chair. If you're doing this obviously at home and want a little bit more stability. One more time, reaching as high as possible, out to the side. As you know, in moon salutations, we start standing and we go into side bend half moon. And this has a nice stretch on the side of the hips too. You saw before I was starting to do the tail tuck, the posterior tilt, the anterior tilt. You can also apply this in your standing pose as you're standing Tadasana. So let's begin. I'm going to come this way and then I will turn front ways. Starting on for Tadasana, we start with our moon salutations. Place one hand onto the belly, one hand behind your lower back, and just start to go for little tucks. Tail reach to the back of the head, tail tucks under. Feeling that movement possibility around the hips, around the pelvis. Try and keep the rib cage as still as possible, and feel out what feels good for you to start to work length through your spine. Arms come overhead, forming Anjali Mudra or a pistol grip. Lift up, and then come to the side. Not going to linger there, we're going to come straight back up, warming through the tissues. As this is a focus around the hips, notice as we lean to the side, you slightly off-center the feet and get a stretch through the side of the hip, the abductors. Then you work that side to pull back up energetically. Side, up, side, up. Last one, moving through before we stay for our hold. Again, figure out what feels better for you to get that nice stretch purely through the lateral side of the body. Maybe it's tucking under, maybe it's sticking out a little bit. Feel it out, lift up, and then slide on over, leaning into the hip, pushing into the feet. Great, guys, I'm going to tune to the other to face you. Stay with it and breathe. Push the fingertips a little higher to the ceiling. Gain a little bit more length here, and go a bit further. And coming back up. Lift, apply whatever tuck you need in the pelvis, posterior, anterior to feel it more in your sides, up and over, and hold. You'll know if you're feeling it in your back here. If you end up hanging into the back, you can see I'm just extending a little bit. Feels quite tight here. So again, play around with that to where you feel that stretch. Hold 4, 3, 2, 1. Coming on up. Releasing. Now I'm not cueing breath for the sequence, purely just focusing on the physical. All right, goddess pose, toes turn out. We drop into goddess. And in goddess, this is a position where you can get quite deep in your hips. So let's have a little play around before we hold it. Hands back on your thighs and start to go for a tuck under with posterior tilt. And then stick the bottom out and feel the tail reaching to the back of the head. Tuck under. Good, and what I want you to see is look down to your knees and see what happens with those two movements. What's happening if your knees start to cave in, or if you're starting to feel too much into the knee joints. Figure out what feels best for you, but with an emphasis on really deepening this hip crease. For me, it's more an anterior tilt. I feel my sit bones widening. I can get quite deep here. I feel my thigh bones pulling into the hip sockets. Really deep, nice, solid, strong position. You are a goddess in this pose. Gaze down. So this is our great setup, right? Before we do all our Malasana, Skandasana, align the shin, the knee over the second and third toe. And hold that strong, everyone. Good, play around here. Feel work in the feet. If you're feeling it too much in the knee joints, pull those feet up like you're standing. Handkerchiefs and you're pulling them up. If you're only feeling it on the interior part of your knee, cue a little bit more engagement from the hips, abductors by pushing your thighs back and working here. 3, 2, 1, and arrive. From here, we're in our 5-pointed star. Nice and strong. Good. Legs in abduction, arms in abduction. Make it a little bit more intense in the legs by pushing the mat apart. Good. So you're abducting, you're using these muscles, but from here, it's a nice easy pose to co-contract the muscles. From here, push into your big toes and feel this inner line, this inner seam into your inner thighs, pulling up into that area of the pelvic floor, lifting them up to your belly button, and hold. Active legs. Good. So in 5-pointed star, we don't have too much of a hip crease. We're just into abduction of the hips. Let's move into triangle, folks. So turn the foot straight ahead. Back foot. Turn on that 45-degree angle. Figure out for you if it feels better to come slightly forward in space, center, maybe back. You'll feel it out. Allow your students to feel like that possibility. All right. Grow tall. We're going to deeply fold into this hip crease. So place your hand here, pulling that thigh in and up. Stretching this hip. Taking the arms down, but not relying on the leg. I want you to feel this in the hips. So lift out of that bottom waistline and lengthen from the hip bone to the armpit. Then from here, activate your legs. So we want this knee to be quite strong and supported. So actively pull the kneecap up using your quads. The front engagement, nice and strong. Same thing with the back leg. Push that way into abduction. And again, pull the kneecap up actively. Working around the front of the knee joint. As of course, we're putting a little bit of load coming down here. Holding that. Keep that engagement as you rise up effortlessly. Great. Coming into your pyramid. Pivoting, stepping a little further forward. Legs are now parallel, hips are parallel, feet are straight. Take your hands into your hip creases as they're both going to get a deep hip crease. This is where we move from. Grow tall and hinge. Hinge, really feeling those bottom cheeks move back and widen as that hip crease deepens. If you're really tight in the hamstrings, you may need to even lift that back knee up, back heel up and bend the knees and then work into straight. Make it easy to feel the hinge rather than the rounding. I always say stick your butt out deep in here, feel it in your heels of your hands. Great. Before we let ourselves fold, grab 2 blocks if you need to create nice length in your spine, a tabletop position. The leg that is forward, for me it's my right leg. To get deeper into the hip, pull that right sit bone back in space, the left hip bone forward. So your waistband is level at the front, level at the back, and hip bones are level with each other as opposed to that. From there, push into the big toes, pull up the quads, because once again, we're straightening the legs, so we are extending the knees and using our quads for that. And then grow tall. So you are active here, guys. The more active you are in the front quads, you'll get an active release here, stretching the hamstrings. Good. Keeping the legs active, of course, you can always go down to your fold. If you're choosing to have a round back, a surrendering to the mat. Just be mindful of the sensations on the back of the leg. Yep, work around to activate around the knee joint. I love in this exercise, in this pose as well, to push into my big toe and to try and fire up an inner thigh connection. Like I'm pulling energy from my big toes up into the inseam of my lycra up and towards my pelvic region. All right. Coming out of that, coming down into Anjaneyasana, back knee drops. Arms come up. Still aim to square your hip bones level. Right leg is the one that I'm lunging into, so I'm going to deepen into this hip crease by pulling my right butt cheek back. I now want to open up this hip, so I'm actively going to stretch my hip flexor by going for a tail tuck now to get more stretch here. So it's kind of countering the squat position, but we're aiming for stretch in this front hip. And up. Push through the whole back foot, guys. Big toe to little toe. Push through the whole shin bone. Notice how that offloads your knee joint, the kneecap. Push through the shin bone and feel like you are being taken up towards the sky. Stand strong into both legs. 3, 2, 1, and then release. Skandasana. Pick up the back knee, tucking the back toes. Move your way around, lunging once again into this leg and picking up the toes. So this is quite a deep single leg squat. Use blocks if you need to. Quite handy if you're feeling it's already quite strong. Otherwise, rule of thumb, play with your hip first. Stick the bottom out to get deeper into the hip, knowing that if you tuck under, you don't get as deep, but if you stick it out, you do. So you drop, especially as we're loading quite strongly into this knee, into that knee. Good to get really deep into the hips. And now use this arm here to push and guide that thigh back to align the knee over the second and third toe. Actively turn that knee and thigh up to the ceiling and hold that. If you need blocks to assist you, always nice from here to come into it to create more extension of your spine. Also, not as deep here in the knee joint, might be easier for some. And then coming on all the way up, ready for Malasana, stepping in. Toes turning out, heels together. Folding at the hips, thinking about depth in the hip crease first, and then working on pushing outwards to align your knee over the second and third toe. So we want to avoid, we're not compromising here by letting the knees cave inwards. Be really active. You could just relax down in Malasana, but let's say for this first round, we add in some muscular activity. So let your bottom drop and then actively lift it about an inch. Actively push your thighs back and space an inch. You can use your arms here, but as long as you're getting that upward lifting motion, everything's working to support you here. You're not just dropping down into those joints. Hold 4, 3, 2, 1. Let's take it over to the other side. Skandasana, second side. Lunging, lifting that heel. Using your hands, playing around with your pelvic position to feel how deep you can go before that happens. For me, I'm actually pretty happy staying here. I've got activity in this leg, activity in my hips. If I go any further, you can see that that happens. I'm going to use my blocks like I did on the last time. As I allow my sit bones to drop, I've got a nice controlled position and I can lift and get energy traveling up my spine. 3. Keep guiding that knee back in space. 2, 1. And release. Great. Turning around into Anjaneyasana, second side. Now for this one, just to note, the front knee, this also might be a position that you might see, and that's okay as long as there's obviously no knee joint pain. You can build up to the knee coming further past the ankle progressively, but just be mindful if anyone does show knee pain, if you're coming too far forward, watching this angle, build up to it slowly, building up that strength around the knee joint. So here we are. I'm going to pull my left sit bone back, my right hip bone forward to create evenness here. So that is uneven. However, that could also be an option if you want it to be. Oh, coming on up. Create now a tuck. As going into a posterior tilt puts my hip flexor on stretch. And that is my main focus here, not so much about that deep lunge position, because I'm not really loading too much into this leg as I'm here. 3, 2, 1. All right, pyramid. Stepping back foot forward, narrowing the stance. parallel feet, square the hips off, knife edges of the hands. Feel this out on the first round, guys. Coming down. Notice if the hips are twisting, front hip sit bone pulls back, this hip bone pulls forward, pushing into the big toes, pulling energy up through your inner thighs, and fully engaging your quads, pulling your kneecaps up. From there, from the activity in your legs, you can find more length through your spine. Keep the activity in your legs as you let yourself fall to the floor, knowing this is going to get more stretch now just through the lower back. 3, 2, 1. And stepping that back foot back in space into Trikonasana, triangle. Arriving up, pulling up through the quads, active feet, arms up. Want to deepen into this hip crease, so I will use my hand to get that feeling of it sliding in and up into that socket. Good. Once again, you know you can always play around, feel it out in space where it feels good for you with that back foot. Lengthening. Push this foot that way, actually engaging the top hip even though it's on stretch, those abductors. Pull the floor up through that arch, kneecap activates. Strong hips, strong quads, strong legs, and rise on up, 5-pointed star. Hitting this nice, easy, but engaging position. Just like your legs, push your hands out, feel that widening, strong position here. 3, 2, 1, let's sink into goddess. Last one, using the heels of the hands as we go through our second round. Hopefully finding this position. So feel how deep you can go. Put that in your muscle memory. Push the thighs back and then hit your goddess. And hold. Feel your knees caving in. Drive down, push back and out. 3, 2, 1. Bring it up. Step in. Anjali Mudra Tadasana, closing the eyes. Enjoying the residual energy traveling through your body, the heat that you've cultivated, the strength that you've cultivated. And also for mood, I find it quite a cooling sequence. Alright, so that was quite a lot of information for round one. We're going to travel through that again, but with less information, just a few smaller cues to hit home the feeling of hip crease and knee alignment.